Alrighty, we are pleased to have on today a guy that is born in Red Deer, Alberta, but grew up in Saskatchewan. Probably recognize him from TSN, also known as TSN's Hockey Insider. He's excellent at his job, all-around great dude. We're pleased to have on today Darren Drager.
How's it going, fellas?
Oh, good. No complaints.
I'm looking at one guy here. He's got an excellent backdrop. You know, he's got the brick and whatever else is going on there with the picture. And terrific.
We got Big Bugard in the backyard.
Yeah. No, it's fine. You're in a basement. I can tell that obviously by the window. And then Drew, I don't know where the hell you are, but you got to up your game in terms of the backdrop.
Yeah, it's not
better roof than I do.
It's not ideal. Because usually we do our podcast usually indoors at a golf facility, but just due to some sound issues with golf balls flying around, I'm now doing it in my condo basement. So
that's all right.
Trust me. Hey, even if we have to do a live interview right now, you're coming over here, and we're setting up downstairs in the basement. So,
hey, I could send you this old beauty. I don't know if you can see it.
Nice.
Oh, there it is.
Hey,
that's lovely. It's a little rider's tarp.
Yeah, Little Rider's tarp from many years ago. I don't get to wear it often enough for a number of different reasons. So I thought just today, in honor of the great province of Saskatchewan, I'd come out ready.
Okay, my first question is, because I couldn't find anything online, but where were you living in Saskatchewan?
Couple of places. I grew up on a farm right between McNutt, Saskatchewan, and Langenburg, Saskatchewan. So elementary school in McNutt, high school in Langenburg. Played the majority of my hockey in Langenburg, which is right on the Yellowhead Highway. So if you're heading east into Manitoba, you're going right through the metropolis, 1,700 people strong of Langenburg, Saskatchewan. So that's primarily where I call home now and have for many years. My parents moved into Langenburg. My mom still lives there, so that's in essence where I call home. But early roots in rural Saskatchewan for sure.
Awesome. Well, we love the Saskatchewan connection on the podcast.
Yeah.
Drags, let's get right into it here. How are things with you? What's going on? What's happening? What's up in your world?
More of the same, man. No different than you guys. I mean, just having to, make amendments to your life, both personally and professionally, and dealing with, the pandemic and, the fact that the restrictions never seem to end. We don't have to get into this deep political or philosophical conversation about it, but, what you see here is what you get from me professionally. This is, in fact, my home studio in my office. And in light of Omicron and the position that TSN and Bell has had to take, most of us on air who have the luxury of having a studio like this haven't really left. I went to the Board of Governors in Florida, meetings there in early December, and excuse me, got tested like no fewer than 4 times, PCR tested twice by NHL officials in Florida. And then 2 more times when I got back, because a colleague of ours from Sportsnet actually tested positive before leaving Florida, and he was stuck in Florida. I know, tough break for another 10 days. But because of that, then Bell policy, I was essentially not quarantined or not isolated, but quarantined here at home for another 14 days. So that took me through the holidays. And then the World Juniors at least started. We all know how it ended. So I've been in studio twice since the 7th of December. So the majority of what I do, I'm doing staring into not this camera, but one very, very similar. So that's basically been my life for the last 2+ years.
Okay, I have a question then, because a good friend of ours, Kelly Rudy, his backdrop, did they just send him a backdrop and say, hey, work from home?
Well, I'm trying to think what Kelly's looks like. I mean, normally he's in his office.
But the Sportsnet one or now, so the banner one.
Yeah, I've seen that. That tells me like maybe he's calling a game and he's from somewhere else. But I did see on Saturday where that was the backdrop. So that just tells me he's not at home, because he's got a pretty cool setup there as well, right? And I got to tell you, like, and this is different from what Kelly would have been doing on Hockey Night in Canada on Saturday as part of their panel. But I got a lot of time for, here I am talking about the adjustments that I've had to make professionally. They're small potatoes. Like, I'm in the comforts of my home, man. I'm walking 20 steps from my kitchen, with a shirt and tie on and a pair of shorts or soft pants. So these guys are calling games from empty buildings where sometimes the team isn't even there, right? I mean, our guys we did an Ottawa game, Ottawa-Pittsburgh on Thursday. Gord Miller and Dave Poulin were actually in the empty building, Canadian Tire Center in Ottawa, calling the game while the Senators were in Pittsburgh. And Lindsay Hamilton and I were in studio. So actually, that's the third time I've been in studio. And Noodles, Jamie McLennan, was from his remote office, his home studio. So, those guys they're twisted and turning a lot more through just having to react to the restrictions of COVID more than I am.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, you mentioned off the record, some sports, you play hockey and whatnot. Walk us through your hobbies and, maybe how long you played hockey for.
Yeah, I didn't play long. My story ends pretty abruptly in the SJHL, where I, in fact, didn't play. I played up to midget and, I knew I wasn't going to advance much beyond that. Maybe could have played in the SJHL. And I remember my brother bugging me because at the time, there was no internet, right? You're not getting an email from somebody saying, hey, we watched you. You're on our list. Why don't you come to, camp and we'll see how it plays out. No, I mean, we got these blanket letters. So I think I got 2 or 3 letters that one particular year. But as I quickly learned out from just making some inquiries, it was nothing more than a fundraiser. So they'd invite like 80 different players. And you all had to pony up like $50, $75, right? But you'd look at the roster and 80% of the roster or more was returning from the previous year. So, I mean, that was where junior hockey kind of slapped me in the face, and I recognized that it was time for me to do something else. But kind of a sidebar story to that, I was so offended at the process. And look, I shouldn't have been. I wasn't very good. But you guys probably know this. Again, especially in rural Saskatchewan, like if you didn't play hockey or curled, you had no choice. You had to curl. I mean, curling in Landsberg, Saskatchewan was part of the phys ed program. So we'd do that at least once a week in the afternoon. We'd go to a local curling rink and curl. And my family, are a bunch of curlers. So I actually liked it. I got into it pretty competitively. So when I quit hockey, which again was pretty early, I focused on curling. And man, we went to, I don't know how many times we played in the province, like the provincial championships, lost the A final one time. Jamie Schneider, you guys remember that name? You're probably a little young, but yeah. So fantastic curler. Terrific. Like that from Kronos, Saskatchewan, which is like the drop in a bucket. I think they had like a 1-sheet or a 2-sheet curling rink, and they were developing world champions. It was ridiculous. So I flipped from hockey to curling for a few years anyway, and curled very, very competitively. So that's the extent of my athleticism in that sense.
Well, speaking of curling, I was in grade 6 and I played in the Bonspiel. We did it. We had obviously we had to do for gym. We did it, and then we're like, oh, we should put a team in. And then we played like the Tartan Club in Regina here, the Highlands.
Oh, I love it.
And we played against a team that they were representing Team Sask. I'm like, well, we just beat everyone. So we're like, for me, I'm a confident guy. I'm like, oh, we're gonna beat these guys, no problem. We got waxed. Like they had plays and systems, and usually we were shitty. So long story short, my curling career came to an end real quick.
I haven't curled in like 25 years, maybe more, might be 30. And some of my old curling buddies, they're always bugging me. And I always make up the excuse over the course of the winter, I just don't have time, which isn't really an excuse, but you can always make time for a spiel, fly in on a Thursday and, hopefully you're out by Saturday and you don't have to worry about Sunday. But I was a tuck slider, right? So I'm sure now my knee would just explode if I ever tried to get into that tuck position. So I'm a happily retired curler. That's best for everybody.
Go ahead, Tanner.
All right. All right. Let's talk about you going to Western Academy Broadcasting College. And then you get offered a job in Winkler.
Yeah.
Going back home, closer to home, and then you take a job in Brandon. How was that experience like? And did you like the play-by-play?
I love the play-by-play. I really, truly did. Yeah, so that was a weird time. And, again, I grew up on a farm. I knew I didn't want to farm. And in the area, aside from agriculture, where I grew up, Langenburg, predominantly it's potash mining, right? And look, I mean, so many good friends and families make a real good living there, but I just could never see myself doing that. Just kind of, that shift working idea. It just didn't click for me. So I'm driving into Yorkton, Saskatchewan with my mom one day, and this radio ad comes on for Western Academy Broadcasting. And I'm like, I had the gift of gab. I could talk my way out of assignments and all kinds of things at school. So I thought, hey, you know what? I might be okay at this. And the only other thing was to go to the University of Saskatchewan, because I couldn't envision living in Regina. I'm not sure why, but so anyway, I applied to the University of Saskatchewan. I thought, okay, I'll try and become a phys ed teacher. Like, at least there's something. And at the time, and it's probably the same now at the Western Academy in Saskatoon, you had to audition. So I went in, I auditioned. You had to, write a big check. It was expensive. I'm sure it's still expensive, but I'm like, you know what, this will work if I can get in. So I end up getting in, and I had a great time there. Had a great time. Learned a lot in a short period of time. Gave me the basic skills and tools of getting some of the opportunities. And back then it was cassette tapes, right? So, part of the process of going through Western Academy is they'd furnish you with like 25 cassette tapes, which you could send out to as many radio stations as you wanted. And I probably sent out a dozen or so at that time, right before we were supposed to wrap up and graduate. And I ended up actually getting 3 or 4 opportunities. And the one in Winkler was hilarious because it was like WKRP. Again, I'm dating myself. You guys are too young for that show, but you walk in and the interview is with a guy who literally owns a used car dealership, which is like a block away from this small station. And he's got the full Herb Tire look. Like, he's got the plaid pants on and the big lapels and all of this. And he's like, have you ever heard of the Corn and Apple Festival? And I'm like, no. And he goes, well, it's a big festival here in Winkler, and we have a strong radio presence there. How do you feel about doing live cut-ins and things like that? Like, they throw to me on location, and I talk about what's going on at the Corn and Apple Festival. I'm like, yeah, I think I can do that. You're hired. Can you start in like a week? Like, I guess so. And then I'm like, as I'm going back to a friend's house where I was staying, I get a call, not a cell phone call. Like, my mom calls this house because Burl Clark was this gentleman's name, was a news director in Yorkton at GX94. And he calls me, or I call him back, and he goes, hey, we've got a job for you. And I said, oh boy. I said, I'm in a bit of a pickle here because I just basically accepted the job in Winkler. And he goes, okay, well, that's too bad. And I said, well, can you give me a couple of hours to think about it? And he said, sure. So anyway, I mean, the Yorkton job was way more convenient because it was like 40 minutes from my home. I could live at home. And I had a great time there, working with some good people. Randy Atkinson taught me a lot about calling play-by-play. He was a longtime SJHL play-by-play guy for the Yorkton Terriers. And away I went to Brandon at a wonderful opportunity there. Spent a lot of time with Kelly McCrimmon, the Brandon Wheat Kings, Kevin Cheveldayoff, who was captain of the Brandon Wheat Kings, all the good players who went through there. Ended up eventually in TV in Winnipeg for another 5-6 years, and then got the job in Edmonton to host Oiler games and be the sports director for A Channel, which was a small chain of television stations in the West. And then in 1998, less than a year in Edmonton, Sportsnet signs on as another national network here in Ontario. And Scott Moore calls me, and I'll never forget, he calls me. I'm actually in Dallas. The Oilers are playing the Dallas Stars in the playoffs. And I get called into the trainers from Barry Stafford as the equipment trainer for the Oilers. And he says, Dregs, there's a call for you in the trainer's office. I'm like, I thought I was getting punked. I like Kelly Buckberger and Doug White, and those guys were always messing around with me. So I'm like, all right, sure. I go in there and I answer the call, and it's a gentleman by the name of Scott Moore. And he goes, Darren Dreger? And I'm like, yeah, Scott Moore. I'm like, sure. And there's kind of a pause. He goes, "Tell me, why have I never heard of you before?" So now I'm convinced I'm getting punked here, right?
Yeah.
But I'm like, all right, well, I just better hear this guy out before I completely burn this opportunity. And it actually was Scott Moore. And short time later, I moved to Toronto.
That's unbelievable. Jay, I want to bring up, because you just mentioned, got a job in Manitoba and then you made your way to the Oilers. What was your reaction? Like, was it, how are you feeling? Was it like, oh my gosh, this is too fast? Or, maybe I'm, going too fast up the ladder. I mean, obviously you enjoyed it, but walk us through kind of just how you went from the Western League to, the NHL.
You know what, Drew, just good luck, hard work, but good luck. And, I speak to a lot of progressing broadcasters and journalists, particularly here in Ontario with, Ryerson and all of the, the institutes that you can now take a variety of things, including your journalism degree. And I always say the same thing. You don't have the same sort of opportunities that I did back in the late 80s. You just don't. I mean, back then, basically every big town, let alone city, had a small level radio station, right? And they had a sports department because everybody wanted to know what the senior hockey team was doing, let alone, the junior A teams, right? The tier 2 teams. So you got paid nothing, but you had an opportunity. And so I'm always very mindful of that. I made my mistakes, not in a classroom, but live on the air and in dealing with people one-on-one. I was always very mindful of that, always very respectful of that. And I think to the relationships now that I have with some of the men that I mentioned earlier, I butted heads with Kelly McCrimmon time and time again. I've had tough conversations with Kevin Cheveldayoff and some of the other guys that I cross paths with over in the West. But there's a mutual respect for one another because they know in the end I'm going to treat them the right way, and vice versa. So, a big part of me just wishes that today's young aspiring journalists and broadcasters had the same ability to go through that path. They don't. Now they've got other opportunities. I mean, obviously social media and the digital platforms that now exist. I think my good friend Rod Peterson and the Rod Peterson show, man, I mean, it's known globally, all kidding aside. Well, there's a man that's worked hard. I mean, he's followed a similar path to me. He's just decided because of his life, he wanted to stay in Western Canada, where I jumped at an opportunity earlier to get on the network scene. And I'm sure that historically he had opportunities and probably still does. So there is that side of it now that is developing for younger journalists and broadcasters, but it's a tough field, and without a work ethic and without having the relationships, and that speaks to some of the people that still work in TV. Jim Haskins, who's, with Global, he was the news director at CKY Television, which is now CTV Winnipeg. When I was there, he became general manager of A Channel in Alberta. And I was one of his first calls. He said, "I need a sports director in Edmonton. Are you interested?" Well, without, working for Jim in Winnipeg, I probably don't get that opportunity. Who knows? Maybe I'm doing something different entirely. But again, it's about the people and how you treat those people along the way that can make a difference throughout your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Turner?
Very good point. Since you started local radio and you made the jump to one of the highest levels very quickly. Was there ever a point that you thought this was too much or it was too tough and wasn't for you, or were you enjoying it right away?
No, I enjoyed it right away. But there was a time, I think back to my days in Winnipeg, and I jumped some steps there just because, we don't have all day to talk about this. But there was a time when I was in Winnipeg where I'm like spinning my wheels and I'm like, oh boy, like, what are we doing here? Like when the Winnipeg Jets were ripped out of Winnipeg and became the Phoenix Coyotes, and Winnipeg, which is a proud hockey area, I respectfully had to settle and fight for the IHL at that time, the Manitoba Moose, which came from Minneapolis. And then, of course, as you know, became the Manitoba Moose of the American Hockey League. I just went, a taste of the NHL. And I just wondered whether or not I was ever going to have another opportunity to work in the NHL. Yeah. And my wife was in Brandon, school teacher in Brandon. So it had taken a toll on my personal life as well. And I had reached out to an old real estate buddy of mine in Brandon. And at the time, you needed to be sponsored by a broker before you could even take the real estate exam. Yeah. So this guy sponsored me, and I was going to take the real estate exam and get the hell out of broadcasting, get out of the business. I mean, I thought, you know what? I like Manitoba. Here's where I'm going to raise a family, all of that. My wife has got a good job, teaching in Brandon. I feel like I'm just kind of, again, spinning my tires. So maybe I should just get out and try something completely different. And I waited, thankfully, and then the opportunity arose very quickly after that in Edmonton, and it was almost like a sign from the broadcast journalism gods. Hey, you're not done yet. Get going. And I needed that, because that opportunity in Edmonton rejuvenated me. And I remember Kelly Buchberger, again, as a close personal friend, but he's captain of the Oilers. 1997, Curtis Joseph is in that. They had a pretty good hockey team, but they weren't expected to do that well. They win their first round, and I'm doing a live hit into A Channel after whatever game it was in Colorado. And Buchberger is our live guest right after the game. I mean, he's peeled his shoulder pads off, taking his skates off. He's sweating coming up there. They go live. And my first or second question is, hey, when this year began, did you honestly think that you'd be standing here tonight in a position to advance to the second round? And he looks at me and he goes, well, put it to you this way. He goes, I was reasonably confident that I'd be standing here, but I had no expectation that you'd be standing here. Pretty good burn by Bucky. So look, I mean, just moments like that stick out, and the experiences that I've had along the way in covering, man, I can't even count how many Stanley Cup finals I've been to, the World Championships, the Olympics, you name it, I've covered it. And it never gets old. I do. And there are days where I feel like I'm, running on fumes, let alone having any gas in the tank. But I'm proud of my career. I'm proud of how hard I've had to work to get to where I am and to sustain it, right? I mean, our industry has really taken it between the eyes like so many other industries have. Layoffs, not every year, like almost every quarter. There are people in our industry that are losing their livelihoods, and I never lose sight of that. And I'm very thankful and grateful each and every day that I've had the ability to continue to do what I do.
Well, you are great at what you do, Dregs. And, another good point here, summer of 06, you go to SportsCenter. What was the transition like going from, not only calling games now, but to more or less breaking down contracts, players, free agents, kind of doing what you do now?
Yeah, it was a challenge. I remember in 2006, I had already started to morph over from being a host. I was a national host at Sportsnet for a number of years, worked with great people there, especially on the air, good friends. And it was tricky, but again, using experiences and relationships that I developed over time. I was now gathering information and was in a position where I could provide that information. But if I rewind a little bit, I didn't do a ton of play-by-play after leaving Brandon. I did some for the Manitoba Moose. In fact, I think I'm the original voice to the Manitoba Moose on TV anyway, in Winnipeg. And then I did some for the Ottawa Senators on network TV regionally back in the day for sports. And so I was kind of a jack of all trades sort of guy there. And Bob McKenzie in 2006, we kind of a brief conversation during the Stanley Cup final in 2006, where he said, look, man, I'm tired of butting heads with you. Hold on a second. I'm drying out. I'm tired of butting heads with you. Is there any interest in perhaps coming over to TSN? And initially I'm flattered. It's TSN and it's Bob McKenzie. I'm like, you know what? Let me give it some thought. I got to do a bit of soul searching here. And Scotty Morrison, who I just looked up to, meant a ton in my career, just taught me so much in the early days, was, again, essentially the news director at Sportsnet. And I couldn't get my head around leaving him high and dry. I just felt like, even though there was turmoil at Sportsnet off air, there was a takeover with senior management, and the direction we were going was bizarre. It was ridiculous. It was goofy. It was just everything. But in fairness, they were trying to win a battle against TSN that they couldn't win, traditionally speaking. So I agreed to not take the TSN job. And that was a tough call, not only to Bob, but to then the boss, Mark Milliere, because he was cutthroat, man. I remember him telling me, look, I don't offer jobs twice. I don't. So you've blown it. I've given you an opportunity to take this job. I'm not offering you a job again. All right, no problem. Well, 2 days later, Scott Morrison gets fired at Sportsnet. Senior management, again, I just described what they were all about. Yeah. They cut him and Jeff McDonald, who's now one of the big TSN radio gurus here in Ontario, right? So those two guys who meant a lot to me. I mean, they were the backbone of all good editorially at Sportsnet, let go. Mackenzie calls me, what in the hell is going on there? And I tell him, I said, Bobby, I was on a golf course. I was playing in a golf tournament. I'm like, I don't know, but it's not good. He goes, I don't know that I'm going to be able to talk Milliere into giving you another crack, but are you willing? I'm like, 100%. Yeah. If he's willing to engage, I'm there. And Mark called me back, and he was as intrigued in what had happened at Sportsnet with Scott and Jeff. So that kind of softened the blow and, maybe eroded whatever pride would have prevented him from re-engaging with me. But thankfully he did. And a day later I signed a contract, and here we are pushing 16 years at TSN.
Love it.
Jeez, what a story. Since you mentioned Bob Margarita, what was it like working with the guy? Like, how much did you learn from him? Like, would you say a big influence on your career?
Enormous. Pioneer of what we do. The first hockey insider, Bob McKenzie. In his early days, of course, there were fine reporters, Scott Morrison among them and others. The beat reporters were the conduit of information. They really were. That's pre-Twitter, pre-social media, pre-internet. So these guys were on it, and Bobby was among the best. So, yeah, I learned a terrific amount. I learned how important it is to break news, to be on the story, all of those things, but more importantly, be right. First, be right. And if you're first in being right, then great. You've got a breaking story, and that's where a lot of the adrenaline and whatnot comes from, but don't be wrong. Bob is the best at juggling all kinds of different things. He's taken on the role of being semi-retired wholeheartedly. I would say he's 3/4 retired, despite the fact that, they roll him out every once in a while. He still has tremendous influence with his rankings. He just did the midseason rankings for the draft eligibles, and I'm looking forward to being shoulder to shoulder with him, hopefully in March for the NHL trade deadline. But yeah, without Bobby Margarita, there's no Darren Dreger as a hockey insider, Pierre LeBrun, Chris Johnson, Elliot Friedman, go down the list. Good hockey reporters, perhaps, good analysts, panelists, call them whatever you will. But the role of the insider, 100%, was initiated by Bob McKenzie.
Dregs, I have a question, and I find it's not hard. It's always hard, I guess, every day, but like building trust and building relationships in the hockey world, it's super tight. How hard is it, to build a relationship, and maybe trust is a better word, but when you're getting details on a possible trade, sign, negotiations, I can only imagine that that foundation takes a while to build.
100% it does. And I spoke of that trust a little bit earlier in the podcast, right? Just, the relationships, you're not going to win every single story. You're just not. There are too many good people in this business, and I've mentioned basically all of them. And there are others. Emily Kaplan with ESPN. There's a list as long as my arm of the great reporters that cover the National Hockey League. And when Twitter first came on board, that was a challenge for me. Not because I was now getting beat on stories. It took me a long time to go, okay, wait a second, maybe not every hockey related item has to funnel through TSN. Maybe I don't have to grind it out every single day looking for an injury update from the Florida Panthers. These great beat reporters in Florida do an excellent job. Yeah. They're tweeting this information out. What's wrong with that? I mean, it's a pure conduit. So it took me a long time to kick my ego aside and just say, hey, no, this is a good thing for me because it makes the distribution of information that much easier. So yeah, I mean, just the whole process has been challenging at times. But I've missed out on lots of stories over the years just because I couldn't put my sources in a tough position. And sometimes that's general managers, sometimes that's coaches, sometimes that's the players. It could be any level of the organization. More times than I can count. There wouldn't be many, and I'm not boasting. I'm just saying this. And I would say, I'm sure Friedman would say the same thing. There wouldn't be many big hockey stories that get out that we don't know about. And, why he's first or I'm first or Frank Saravalli's first or, Pierre LeBrun is first or whomever, it doesn't really matter. But there wouldn't be many that we don't know about. But it's the timing. It's being absolutely certain that the information you're about to pass along and make public is accurate that matters the most. And sometimes you have to do that on the timeline of your sources and in protecting your sources. So relationships are everything.
Yeah.
Let's move on to golf now. I mean,
all right. Sounds good.
We've talked a lot about your life here, and let's talk about your golf game. How much you playing and what's it like?
Yeah, I don't play nearly as much as I used to. Again, just timing, right? And because of that, my game is not very good, or not compared to what it used to be. I mean, in the early days when my kids are gone now, so I'm making excuses for a lousy golf game, and there's no reason for that. For me now, golf is more about the socializing than it is about the actual game. I mean, I'm part of Team Titleist, so I go out there and I try my best to represent. I've got the fancy irons. I got this crazy putter, which I'm convinced is going to make me a better putter because I'm an awful putter. So I love the game. I really do. I played a golf course here locally, Royal Ashburn. Try and get out as often as I can. So I'm probably on average twice a week. If I play 30 times over the course of a summer, then that's pretty good. But we have a lake property in Manitoba on Lake of the Prairies, and there's a little 18-hole par 3 called Prairie Lake Lodge. And man, it is just this mint little par 3 18-hole course. Greens are just absurdly fast and crazy, but it's just a fun golf course to play, right? And it's rural Manitoba. I almost said Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan's actually on the other side of the lake. But there are almost no rules. Like I've seen dudes out there without a tarp on. I've seen men and women playing without shoes on, going barefoot. I mean, I've seen sixums, sevensums out there. But you can play 18 holes in an hour and a half, 2 hours, and nobody really cares, right? Yeah. Nobody cares. They're out there having fun. So that's a long-winded way of just describing how poor I am now. Hey, look, if I shoot 83, 84 right now, I'm ecstatic. I'm ecstatic. My normal game is probably in the 85 to 87 range. So, but I'm vowing to work on it this year.
Well, Darren, everything you said this podcast so far has been great, except for you said a Titleist sponsored. We're a TaylorMade podcast, but that's okay.
Sorry. I love TaylorMade too. That new driver, man. James Duthie and Jeff O'Neill and all these guys that do you guys follow Duthie on Instagram or on Twitter?
I texted James the other day. He got the driver. Yeah. I was like, turn, you see with this? And I texted James. I'm like, I want one of those. And he's like, no. Because he got like the unboxing. I was so jealous. And I texted our rep. He's like, that's for the big dogs, Drew.
Yeah. Like, I mean, it was like he was about to make love to the box.
Oh, yeah. I think
I'm surprised he didn't have gloves on. God forbid he should actually get fingerprints or peanut butter on the grip or something absurd like that. But he's hilarious. I mean, James is a terrific golfer. He hasn't always been that way. So when I think of a role model to get my game in check and in tune, he's who I think of, because I'm telling you, it's not that long ago. It's probably 5+ years ago. He would struggle. Like he would, go on a string of pars and then he'd take an 8 or a 10, like just hit it sideways. Now, I mean, he's consistently in the 70s, and he can shoot 75 or lower. He can play, but he's such a student of the game. Ferrero and I make fun of him all the time because he's got every apparatus and teaching tool that is on the market. And I played one summer with him, and I vowed I'd never play again with him, because so he had taken a lesson, or he was doing this tutorial on YouTube or whatever. And whoever was teaching, it was like a weight transfer drill, right? So you'd hit the ball and you'd step through.
Yeah.
So you'd hit and then you'd take an extra step or two. And that was just to show that you had properly shifted your weight. The transfer was accurate. He was doing it on the golf course, and every hole he was doing it, and every shot on the fairway he was doing it. We're like, you look like an idiot. Like, what are you doing? So anyway, but I can't look at the bottom line. I can chirp him as much as I want. He's a hell of a golfer. He really is. He kicks me all over the place. So I guess that's all that matters.
That match, I think, with Jerry D toughened him up. He needed that. He needed a real, stern talking to on the course with chirps and stuff. And he's a lot tougher now.
Another good golfer.
Yeah, he's a good golfer. Drags, one more here, and then we're going to go to our questions for the gallery. Favorite downtime thing to do? I'm sure you've been to the Bob Father's cabin. I mean, obviously you mentioned you go to your cabin on lakefront there, but I mean, what are you up to, when you're not covering hockey?
Good question. I mean, not much of late, obviously. We're not in lockdown officially here in Ontario, but more or less. I mean, like restaurants, pubs, things like that, you can't go into. They're closed. They're reopening at 50% capacity, I think, the end of this month. What do I do? I watch a lot of football. I'll give you, as we're recording this here on Monday, Sunday, I got up, speaking of golf, watched Brooke Henderson, a couple of hours of that LPGA Tournament of Champions. Big fan of junior hockey. A buddy of mine, his son, Matt Poitras, plays for the Guelph Storm. He's a pretty highly ranked NHL draft eligible player. So I watched them for a period and a half play the London Knights. Then that took me into the LA Rams and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. What a game that turned out to be. I mean, It was sideways for the first big chunk of it. And then obviously watched the Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs last night. So a lot of that. We sold our house in a pandemic, which is borderline insanity, but we did a year and a half ago. And the house that we bought had a big 3-bay garage. Actually, the one I had a 4-bay garage. So that's my description of downsizing. I went from a 4-bay to a 3-bay. But I said to my wife, Holly, when we moved, I'm like, all right, I am going to pimp out this garage like you're not even, so just carte blanche. I'm just telling you, don't be surprised at what you see, but that's why I'm going to do it. We're in a pandemic and we're going to be in a lockdown, and I want a place for my buddies to come and watch football, watch golf, socially distance, and everything will be fine. So that's what we did. And so I pimped out this big garage. I got a big 90-inch screen TV. I've got stainless steel bar. What else? Fridge, obviously, all kinds of stuff. So, on occasion, not all the time, but on occasion on the weekends, a couple of my buddies will stumble in there and we'll watch some sports. So that's about the extent of my recreational time.
All righty, off to our segment called Questions from the Gallery, sponsored by Rubber Co. Located in Regina, 100% recycled rubber. They have tons of options: rubber flooring, parking blocks, training tools, and everything they sell is made out of used tires. It's incredible. Well worth the money. Be smart and think with your head. Choose Rubber Co. today. Call them at 306-541-9840. You guys like that? Think with your head.
I liked it a lot.
Deadly.
That's a pretty good voice too.
Thank you. All right. Best story you can think of covering sports or with the boys. Maybe gone bad story. They're kind of funny too.
Oh, that's a good question. I've had some unique ones. Best is a challenge because of just, all the experiences. Where's the picture? I don't know if you can see it right up there. Can you see it up there? Hold on a sec.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
So
who's that?
yeah,
Never heard of that guy.
yeah, exactly. So that was the second cup in Pittsburgh. And by this time, I'd kind of tried to develop the habit of getting to the captain of the Stanley Cup winning team as quickly as possible while they have the cup in hand, right? So the first one, the players were a little bit more resilient or reluctant because, the media is out on the ice, right? Like, I think the players initially, the clubs were a little reluctant, but it was a better option than having all the media charge into the dressing room after you've just won the Stanley Cup. I mean, you're drinking champagne, you're crushing beers, you're celebrating, you've earned it. The last thing you need, is to do 50 different interviews. Yeah. So when the players kind of recognized the upside to it, they were still a little bit reluctant. So I didn't get Sid with the cup the first crack. And then I reached out to him and I said, hey, if you win again, bud, you got to skate over to me. That's just part of the routine here. And he did. Like I was somewhat joking, right? And he did. And so I had a similar experience with Ovechkin when the Capitals won the Stanley Cup. And he did the same thing. But a funny story as he's skating, you remember when the Caps won the cup. I mean, you probably couldn't see it on TV because they were smart enough not to show. But there was a woman behind the end boards, flashing. Yeah, she's flashing. So she's, lifting her gear and like splattering up against the glass. And he is killing himself laughing. Ovi can't get enough of that. So, I mean, he's had his time. He's done his live interviews with the networks. So he skates over to me and he's just like cackling out loud. You see that? You see that? That's hilarious. And so, I mean, that didn't quite make it to air, but, so those two moments would rank right up there in terms of the positive. I mean, I've got lots of negative ones where, managers, I remember Brian Burke years ago, manager for the Vancouver Canucks at the time. I've told this story before, but I'll make it quick. So I'm at Sportsnet at the time. I'm hosting. I think we had Nick Kiprios on the panel with maybe Scott Morrison, Bill Waters, whoever was on the panel. John Garrett could have been on there. Anyway, the Canucks are on a bit of a run. Marcus Naslund is hurt. Captain of the Canucks is hurt. Broke his leg. I mean, it wasn't insignificant, but he's done. So they hang his sweater near the door of the dressing room on the way out, and the players would kind of fist bump an empty sweater or do whatever they did going out. Well, I kind of tongue in cheek, certainly half-heartedly said to the guys, all right, I've never played at that level, obviously, but he's got a broken leg. He's around. He's not going to play. But what sort of inspiration do you get when you tap the sweater on your way out? I mean, again, a big part of the team. I'm not trying to downplay it, but just explain it to me. And these guys go off, and like Kemper's like, it's crazy. It doesn't mean anything. And so we just hammer the Canucks for this. And Brian Burke calls me the next morning. It's like 8:15 in the morning. I'm actually feeding my daughter breakfast, my infant daughter, and he rips into me F-bomb after F-bomb. Like, who do you think you are, you piece of blah, 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 blah. And I mean, even if I wanted to, I wouldn't have got a word in edgewise. And finally, I'm like, all right, I've had enough of being berated. And I'm like, Berkey, I'm literally feeding my daughter breakfast right now. I'm like, you want to continue this conversation? Let's have it on live television. I'll give you your opportunity tonight. I'll set up the camera and satellite time. You can take a run at me and we can try and defend why we did it. But, rather than yell at me with my daughter, sitting here trying to get her breakfast, let's do it on TV. And he basically tells me to pound sand
Yeah.
in a less than polite way. And about 10 minutes later, TC Carling, he's in the media relations department of the Vancouver Canucks, calls me back. He goes, Dregs, Berkey wants to know, you guys okay? Everything good? I'm like, yeah, we're fine. But that's just old school sports, old school hockey. Like, he was upset. He blew his stack. I pushed back. He knew that he wasn't going to knock me over with a feather. So rather than agree to do this nonsense on TV, that's his way of saying, okay, you're pushing back and I get it and I respect you for that, but are we good? And we were good. And then the other one that comes to mind real quickly, and it's just because it's so obscure. In Winnipeg, Evander Holyfield comes in, and very religious guy. So he was there for, some sort of religious event. He was visiting a church, speaking at a church, whatever it was. And they invited me, to promote this event, but to come and have a sit down interview with him while I was in Winnipeg. And I went in there, and I've never been more intimidated by another human being in my entire life. Like, his hands were like Christmas hams. Like, I shook his hand and he crushed my hand. Like, it was, and his neck, like, I couldn't stop looking at this mountain of a human being staring back at me. And I just thought, man, knowing very little about boxing, I'm like, this is one interview I'm never going to forget. And I was right at the time, because I've never forgotten it.
That's hilarious. All right. What's your favorite post-round beverage?
Golf?
Yeah.
And why do you say post-round? I mean, we're not savages. We have a couple of beers on the golf course. That's what we do. That's why I'm a terrible golfer. Yeah, full disclosure. Yeah, I would be Bud Light. I'm a pretty simple guy. And I always equate it. Like, people say, well, why do you drink Bud Light? I'm like, because my doctors have always told me you have to drink as much water as you possibly can get in your system. It's 96% water. So, yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty simple prairie guy, fellas. If I'm going to drink on a golf course, or if I've got a ride home and I'm going to have a beverage post, it would be beer. Not very often do I dip into the hard stuff. On occasion, we talked about Bobby Margarita earlier, and obviously he's peddling his Bobby Margaritas now, which were very tasty, by the way. But traveling with Bob, bit of a wine connoisseur. Not sure you guys would get that or not. Yeah, Bobby likes his red. So over the years, I've acquired a bit of a taste for it, but I'm really the only one in my house that drinks it. So I've gotten away from that. But post-golf, it would be a Bud Light.
Ultimate foursome, Dregs.
Interesting. Well, Arnold Palmer for sure. I was going to say Nicholas, but I actually, years ago, 1997, followed Nicholas around for, it was at the Skins game in Whistler, and he was playing in it. And me and my brother-in-law had passes to go watch. It was Freddie Couples, Nick Faldo, Jack Nicklaus, and Greg Norman. Wow. That was the Skins in 97 at Whistler. And I don't know if Jack recognized this, because there wasn't a lot of media there. There weren't that many people. But they played 9 holes in the morning, and then they could play practice after. And so we're like, Jack Nicklaus, like, why wouldn't we go watch him pound the ball for a few practice holes if that's okay? Security said, yeah, no problem. Your credentials, go ahead. Just don't bug him. Well, yeah, I'm not going to bug him. So he was out there with his wife, Barbara. His son was caddying for him. And he's maybe a hole into his practice round, and he sees us, and we're keeping distance. Like, we're like 75 yards from the tee, and we're way back. We're keeping our distance. Finally, the second, maybe third hole, he turns, he goes, fellas, come here. And he calls us up onto the tee. And he goes, hey, you guys here working? What are you doing? And I introduced myself, and I said, yeah, we're just hanging out. Don't let us interrupt what you're doing. Walk along. Don't be afraid. We're all good. And he's hitting that old 3-wood persimmon. I don't know if you guys remember that. I'm sure he doesn't play it anymore, but it was just the smallest golf club, and he could just pure this thing. And he'd hit that thing off the deck, and it sounded like he was just splattering a marshmallow, and it was gone. and I just, so, okay, I had a long-winded way. Jack should be in that foursome, but God rest his soul. Arnie Palmer, I never met the man, but the stories that are untold, are apparently off the charts legendary. So I would hope he'd tell a few of those. Gordie Howe would be in that foursome for sure. Man, beyond that, it gets a little tricky, right? Because I've been around Wayne Gretzky and some of the great NHL players of our time enough that it would be fun. Don't get me wrong. It would be fun. I don't know, maybe a legendary football player or somebody like that. I don't know.
The lady that,
I don't know.
Obi.
What's that?
Lady that flashed Obi.
Yeah, no, to keep my marriage and my 50%, I'd probably leave her out of it. I have to give that some thought. I'm going to leave that 4th spot open for a bit because there's just so many people that I could include. So many people.
Still a good threesome, though. It's good.
Not bad, yeah.
Rip, you any more?
Handicap. I know you mentioned kind of what your averages are. You got a real handicap or no?
I didn't keep it last year, but just based on previous years, and I was probably around, I might have been a bit better last year. I'm going to say I'm around at 12.
And for matches.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah. Because I'm the guy that can hit it pretty deep off the tee. Yeah. And I'm pretty good with my long irons and my wedges. I'm just a terrible putter. So if I'm in that foursome or twosome where I'm with a partner that can putt, then we're okay. Yeah, we're okay.
You can make 3s and 4s as a 12. You'd be a hell of a match player.
Oh, I'll tell you what, man, for sure. So I am, like I said, I've vowed to work on the game a little bit more this year. So my goal is to get back to being a 10. So we'll see if that's doable.
Absolutely. Okay, Dregs, I have one more here for you. We usually end off the podcast with this one, but just some advice for a young listener today, whether, they want to be a doctor or hockey insider or hockey pro player, whatever it is in life, just, some success and some advice for them.
Well, yeah, don't be afraid to dream. Just bottom line, isn't it? And it doesn't matter what job you're looking at, what your passion is in life, follow it, chase it. And I've turned my attitude on that probably in the last decade or so. I mentioned that I've done a lot of this. I've talked to a lot of schools over my time, and there was a stretch where I'd go to Ryerson and their sports journalism program, and I'd almost try and talk them out of it. Say, guys, the industry is shifting here. People are losing their jobs. Like, do something else. But who am I to say that, right? If you're passionate about it, if you really feel strongly that you can make your way in the world and climb that ladder, then chase it. Why not? And it doesn't matter if it's TV, if it's radio, if it's being a hockey player, whatever it is, right? But put your all into it. Don't half-ass it. And again, if we're talking specifically about my industry, and I always laugh at the people here in Toronto, especially the students in these classes. Where are you from? Toronto. Okay, well, where do you see yourself starting? Well, it'd be great if I could get like an entry-level position at TSN or Sportsnet and, kind of work my way up. Yeah, I'm willing to start off air, but hopefully one day I'm on air. I'm like, well, why wouldn't you start on air and, go out east, go out west, like go somewhere where you're going to put in time doing what ultimately you want to do. So be prepared to travel. If you think you're going to start in Toronto and end in Toronto, that's not the real world, and you're short-circuiting your dream. So, it doesn't matter what you are as a hockey player. There'll come a time where as hockey players or any sort of position in sport, when you're done, when the dream is over and now you got to start getting into real life. But, Bob's son, Mike McKenzie, told my son, Mason, this a long time ago: play hockey for as long as you can at the highest level that you can play it. And, you'll know when you're done. You'll know when you're done, but don't let somebody tell you you're done. Know when you're done. So I got a lot of time for that as well. And I look at Mike and the career that he has, as a terrific executive of the Kitchener Rangers here in the Ontario Hockey League. So be it in hockey or in broadcasting, I think, kind of the same two positions and approaches should serve people well.
Well said, Darren. Man, I appreciate this today. I know Turner did. It was a lot of fun. Hope we can do it again down the road.
Yeah.
Hope to see you back in studio, day in, day out, like you always are. But yeah, we appreciate your time today, and we hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, I did. Thanks for having me, fellas. For sure. Let's do it again. And good luck in your quest of getting that driver. That's stealth. Why not? Good luck.
We'll get it.
Thanks, Drake. Take care.
Okay, fellas. Take care.